Speaking ahead of the big game on Sunday, Manchester United boss Ruben Amorim has played down comparisons between his start at Manchester United and Mikel Arteta's start at Arsenal. Let's start with that, Kweku. He says he's not going to have the time like Arteta had. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it is fair to say. I think there's a combination of things. And it's interesting because I feel like Arteta, despite not winning, he's won the FA Cup, but not winning the league or Champions League yet, a lot of new managers who come into football clubs use him as the benchmark or the example to almost buy themselves more time. I've heard Maresca reference Arteta. Obviously, Amorim's reference Arteta. And what Amorim does a lot as well is play up the size of Manchester United. I remember when United were going to play against Spurs, and he respectfully said that Spurs and Manchester United are just different in terms of the size of the football club. I think he's doing the same thing here. Not downplaying Arsenal, but he's being honest. Manchester United are the zeitgeist. They're the most talked about club. You ain't going to get 2 seasons of finishing 8th for Manchester United and keep your job. We mentioned it before. He might walk after this season. And so I look at this Manchester United side and I look at an Amorim that is under pressure. And every time he talks, it seems to make headlines. It seems to be a talking point. And this is just another example of that. No way was he taking a dig at Arteta, but I think he was being pretty honest.
We've been talking earlier in the show about the superiority of Arsenal versus Manchester United, generally speaking. I know they're without some players and their forward line is a little bit depleted, etc., etc. But what I find really interesting and what I think is going to impact this game is kind of the dynamic of it, right? For Manchester United, there's probably a temptation or even a subconscious thing that means that they're going to have one eye on midweek against Real Sociedad, right? They're not going to climb too far up the Premier League table, you wouldn't imagine. That tie is in the balance, and obviously the second leg is next week. Whereas for Arsenal, it's the opposite, right? They probably might have gone into this, had the result at PSV been very different, thinking, okay, we're not going to win the league. Maybe we need to kind of think about some rotation here. But instead, they can now rotate in Europe. Yeah. So does the fact that Manchester United might have one eye on that game, does it give Arsenal even more of an advantage?
I think so. But also what Amorim's done in recent weeks is all downplay the importance of winning the Europa League. He said that's not integral to his future Manchester United. He needs to get his team playing good football. And so, yeah, they will be concentrating on the game midweek because that has added importance. The dangling carrot of qualifying for the Champions League by winning the Europa League is something that they have to capitalise on. So I do think Arsenal go into this game, especially where they can rest players midweek against PSV, with the ability to play their strongest team without having to think about the consequences of midweek. And Manchester United go into it maybe looking to preserve themselves for a game that's very, very important against Sociedad in midweek. But we said it before, this game's just lacking something. It's just lacking that extra bit of bite that you need. But it's Arteta's 200th game in charge of Arsenal, if I'm not mistaken. So he'll be looking to win this game and win it convincingly. And I think that's what Arsenal will do come the weekend.
I hope so.
What do you think, though? Do you think that Arsenal are maybe looking over their shoulder at a Man City who are starting to gather some pace and thinking to themselves, granted, we won't win the league, but we have to at least finish second. And finishing third is almost a disaster.
Yeah, I think they have to consolidate that second place position, because what that will at the very least do is show, okay, maybe there's some regression this season, but if they could achieve the same position as they did last season, which was lauded as a very good campaign, given all the problems they've had, I think that will be seen as not a win. I don't want to go that far, but at least internally, I think that's something that they can look at and be quite proud of themselves if they're able to achieve that. Having said that, though, if you have to sacrifice second to finish third, but it means you go an extra round in the Champions League, you'd take that as well.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you next.
You take that, wouldn't you? Like, if you increased your chances of getting past Real Madrid or Atletico Madrid, but it meant you had to not throw a game, but deprioritize a game in the league, I think you do that.
You do it.
I think you do it. I think you've got to do it, because second or third doesn't make the world of difference, does it really?
That's my thoughts on it. I think that it's all eyes on European competition. It's quite nice to have that as a fan, where like the league campaign is effectively done, but you've got that Champions League midweek fixture to look forward to, and it's a trip to Madrid regardless, whether it's Atletico or Real Madrid. And you've got a chance in those ties. I know that if you play Real Madrid, they'll be big favourites, but we've seen against lesser sides this season, Real Madrid have struggled, and despite the fact that they dispatched Man City pretty comfortably in the second leg, they have shown vulnerability. Arsenal go into that game or that tie full of confidence and feeling that they can cause an upset. If it's Atletico, it's a completely different prospect. Arsenal will be confident of making it through to the next round, despite the fact that they are wily under Symeou. And so there is that balancing act that Arteta does have to consider when it comes to the league versus the Champions League when you get into the later stages of that competition.
It would be the dark arts derby, wouldn't it, if we were to face Atletico? We touched on this game right at the beginning of the show, and one of the things you said was that you were really, really excited to see Ethan Nwaneri in action again. Let's have a listen to what Mikel Arteta has had to say about a potential call-up to the England squad for young Ethan Nwaneri and his teammate Miles Lewis-Skelly. Would you call him up?
Lewis-Skelly definitely gets called up because of the injury to Lewis Hall. I think that he's a banker. England have been lacking a player to play on the left side of that defence for a while. It depends on what Tuchel does as well. He plays 3 at the back or 4 at the back. That remains to be seen. With Nwaneri...
Well, there's no Saka. So does he take that spot? Or is there someone else further ahead in the pecking order?
I'd have to have a look at the potential contenders, but with Nwaneri, with the way that he's playing, and I think he's got the opportunity on a big stage on Sunday to really make a mark. If he plays really well, gets a goal, gets an assist on Sunday, then I think he does get called up, and I would love to see it. I think if you're good enough, you're old enough. We saw it firsthand, me personally, as somebody who's following England during the Euros, a 17-year-old Lamine Yamal absolutely tear England to shreds and tear a lot of teams to shreds in that tournament. And I'm not saying that Nwaneri's on that level. I think Yamal is otherworldly. But I think if you're good enough, you're old enough. And I think if Thomas Tuchel sees enough from him, he will call him up. And I really like what I see from this player. You see maturity. And I think when you're a young player and your game is not predicated on explosive pace, then, and it's based on a bit more nuance, I get even more excited. Like I saw with a Yamal, like I've seen with the best young players. When I saw Garnacho coming through, I was like, he's very good, but it's all raw pace and there's not much decision-making or thinking going on. With Nwaneri, he's a thinking man's footballer, and I think he's going right to the very top.
Yeah, he's a natural talent. You can see it from a mile off. Yeah. You could see it from the very first time he took to the field as an Arsenal player. And I know Jason Cundy was adamant, wasn't he, all that time ago, that Arteta had only brought him on as a bit of a kind of vanity project, like just to say, look, I brought on the youngest players of it. But it was obvious that there was talent. It was obvious that they spotted something in him. It was obvious that they wanted to give him something to almost send the message that says, look, you're a young man, you're 15 years old, and I know there are other clubs sniffing around you, and there were at the time. I think Chelsea were one of them.
Yes.
I think Chelsea, Manchester United, I think there were a few clubs that were sniffing around him at the time. Mikel Arteta almost had to give him something that said, there is a pathway for you here. And no matter how difficult it looks, if you're good enough, if the talent's there, we will bring you through. Yeah. And over time, they've done it gradually. I think what Arteta did really, really well was resist the temptation to throw him in the absence of Odegaard at the start of the season and put pressure on him. He sort of resisted that. He brought him in and out of the team. And then, obviously, the situation got to what it got to, and he started using him wide right. Where does he fit in, though, when Bukayo Saka comes back? That's kind of my worry.
That's what I want to ask you. What's his best long-term position?
For me, I've always sort of watched him and believed that he is a creative midfield player that could fit into the Martin Odegaard role. But is he as physical as Martin Odegaard? I mean, he's quite stocky and quite strong, and obviously physically he's still developing. But I look at him and I just think actually playing on the right-hand side has worked out perfectly for him, because he doesn't have to be as structured in his game, and he can go roaming a little bit more without it impacting the sort of structure of Arsenal's team generally. So I think actually from the right-hand side is probably his best position. But I do feel like when Saka returns, you've got the luxury of having him as cover for both Odegaard and Saka. Well, and that would give him a fair few minutes. Not maybe from the start necessarily, but, you know, you want to take Odegaard off with 20 to go, stick Nwaneri there. You want to take Saka off with half an hour to go, stick him there. I think he's going to get more opportunities because of that versatility.
Versatility is key. It's key for young players. We saw it with Bukayo Saka in terms of his ability to play in different positions. Lewis-Skelly has shown a versatility in terms of his ability to just slot in as a left back. I think when he first came in, people said that he wasn't. Is that not his natural position, Lewis-Skelly? Where's his?
He's a central midfielder.
Central midfielder. That happens quite a lot. So was Trent. Trent came in at right back. He's one of the best right backs in the world.
Still is Trent, I would say. Can't defend.
That's a conversation for another day.
I knew that would wind him up.
But it's funny that he brought up Martin Odegaard. He burst onto the scene when he was 15, 16 years old. And he is now 26 years old. And so there's been so much development to a point now where he's, in my opinion, a world-class footballer. And so it's so early in Nwaneri's career. He might develop into something completely different. He's got maybe 6-7 years before he's actually in his prime.
He might even become a striker. The way he finishes, it's not beyond the realms of possibility.
Football has developed so differently, and I think that we just need to see how it plays out. We need to see where the opportunity presents itself, because that's also a big thing in football. Arsenal are a top side competing for top trophies. They're not just going to give a place out to a youngster because he's from Hale End. They need to see where he fits into what Arteta wants to do in terms of his phases and where Arsenal needs to get to. But there's no doubt about it. He's just such a good footballer, and from the moment I saw him play extensive minutes, I said, yeah, it was in the cup. I think I saw him play against Bolton, and he just showed.
He's got a hat trick now.
Yeah, he showed that he's just got the ability to do it in men's football, and he can do it in the Premier League. And I think every level, every step up that he has to make, I think he'll make it seamlessly.
Speaking of young, promising talents, Chido Obi, obviously
nervous.
Is an interesting subplot in this one, a little bit, because you can see the headlines writing themselves already, can't you? He's obviously left Arsenal. He's joined Manchester United. Can't feature in Europe for them because he wasn't registered in the squad. But in his cameo appearances so far for the Red Devils, he's looked quite good. Would you say that he's a better option right now than Rasmus Højlund? Has Højlund been so bad that you just go, let's see what happens? You just roll the dice, see how it goes?
Manchester United fans are drunk on Rashford juice right now, and they're thinking back to when Rashford made a similar impact against Arsenal when he was a youngster and really burst onto the scene. And it was the game against Arsenal, the goal against Arsenal, that really established him as a starter under Louis van Gaal. And they think they can see a similar thing happening with Chido Obi. I would personally, again, I'm all for if the performers in your team, the grown-ups in your team aren't performing, you've got a kid who's shown that in cameo appearances he's hungry and he's got ability as well, why not throw him in? Manchester United have got nothing to play for in the league. And if it's a case of he can't feature next week in the Europa League, why not start him against his former side and see if that narrative and headline can play out? I would start him. I think Rasmus Højlund has been poor. I think they should look to sell Rasmus Højlund in the summer. It just hasn't worked out. I'm not saying he's a poor player. His record in European competitions, goal-scoring wise, has actually been pretty good at Manchester United. Scored 5 goals in the group stages in the Champions League last year. I think he scored 4 or 5 goals in the group stages of the Europa League this year. He's a player that's clearly got some level of ability, but I don't think the Premier League suits his skill set. And come 4:30 on Sunday, I would like to see Chido Obi starting.
Yeah, it's not really working out for Rasmus Højlund at the minute. I've got a bit of sympathy for him because I think United really overpaid for him in the first place.
Yeah.
And that adds a pressure, doesn't it? That adds a level of expectation that I don't think he was ever equipped really to handle. Quick fire predictions. I'm going to go famous old 1-0 to the Arsenal.
I'm going 3-1 Arsenal.
Lovely. Let's hope that we're both right and there's an Arsenal victory at least. I don't care about the score.
Yeah, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.